2007.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. As my colleague Annette King outlined, this is an excellent bill. This is a very good bill that not only streamlines our prescribing processes and streamlines the way in which we approve medicines and medical devices, but it also improves access to healthcare, particularly primary healthcare. It will improve people's access to medicines. It will make it an awful lot easier for many people, particularly people with chronic conditions, to be able to access the medicines they require, which is clearly the reason why the National Party has held it up for so long. It must be, because it's such a good piece of legislation that improves access to healthcare. That must be why the National Party has held it up for so very, very long. A little bit of history for those who are watching at home. The National Party has actually known all along that this is a good piece of legislation. They know that this is the right thing to do. But back in 2007, the National Party, and in particular Tony Ryall, saw a political opportunity. People may or may not remember a gentleman by the name of Gordon Copeland. Gordon Copeland was elected to this Parliament as a member of the United Future Party. He decided to leave the United Future Party, despite being a list MP whose only mandate to be here was the fact that United Future had gained a certain amount of party vote, and that their leader had managed to win an election, win an electorate. So Gordon Copeland was here as a United Future member. He decided to leave, and he made it his life's work to oppose the Labour government on absolutely anything he could.
When he remembered to vote.
When he remembered to vote. And he did remember to vote against this legislation that improves access to medicines and primary health care. And the National Party thought to themselves, aha, with his vote opposing the government, if we decide to oppose this, we can actually stop the Labour government achieving something that is enormously positive for the people of New Zealand. So rather than doing the right thing, rather than having the interests of New Zealanders at heart, rather than doing something which will improve the health of every New Zealander, the National Party chose to play politics. And they blocked the Labour government from passing this legislation. Now, that was bad enough, frankly, but when they got into government, the election was done. The little political power play had the effect they were looking for. It was just one of the things that led up to the 2008 election, and National was now the government. They had the opportunity to act. They had the mandate to act. This bill, the Medicines Amendment Bill, which of course is exactly the same legislation as Annette King introduced, but it got rearranged slightly and reintroduced in the name of the Honourable Peter Dunn, was introduced on the 13th of October 2011. So it took them almost an entire term of Parliament to introduce the legislation. It then got its first reading after the 2011 election in February 2012. It came back from the Select Committee in August 2012, and it finally got its second reading in March this year.
What?
And so here we are in November, under urgency. Suddenly this piece of legislation has become tremendously important to the government. It's so urgent. It's only taken them 5 long years to get to this point, and now it's suddenly so urgent to pass it through its committee stages to get to here. And John Hayes just tried the 9 long years line. John Hayes just tried the 9 long years line. We could have had this done when Labour was in government, but your party, Mr. Hayes, your party blocked it. Your party stopped it happening. They played politics over it. That's what they did, Mr. Hayes, who put the health and well-being of New Zealanders to one side to play politics. You should be careful with your interjections, Mr. Hayes. On this side of the House, we wholeheartedly support this legislation. We think it is a great pity that it has taken so long to pass this legislation. It's actually outlasted the Honourable Peter Dunn. That is saying something quite significant, that it managed to outlast the Honourable Peter Dunn. But, sir, this is good legislation. Annette King has covered the fact that it will set up the joint. It's the interim phase before we get to the joint regulator. But I'm frankly, Mr. Chair,
in Lees-Galloway,
I'm more interested in the prescribing rights. The fact that this widens and deepens prescribing rights for many health practitioners, and I'm particularly interested in that because of the fact that so many people do not have adequate access to primary health care. And GPs are tremendously important. GPs will always be an incredibly important component of primary health care, but we simply cannot provide the primary health services that we are going to need in the future if we totally rely on general practitioners to be the sole bastion of all prescribing rights. We do need to move towards more nurse-led clinics. We need to give nurse practitioners more opportunities. I'm looking forward to Dr. Paul Hutchison's contribution on this legislation, but we do need to make greater use of our highly qualified, highly educated nursing workforce, and in particular the nurse practitioner workforce. That is the only way we are going to provide the primary healthcare services that New Zealand is going to need, and in particular that is how we are going to reach into those most deprived communities that simply do not have the primary health facilities that they need. And Dr. Paul will have heard me talk about this at Health Select Committee recently. If you map the location of primary health care services against the deprivation index, you get an almost perfect correlation. The most affluent parts of any community have an overabundance of general practitioners, and the least affluent,
get more sick in those areas.
I'm not sure that people get more sick, and maybe money makes you sick. I don't know. But people in the most affluent areas have an overabundance of GPs, and the people in the least affluent areas have minimal or sometimes non-existent services. And it is those people who need primary health care services the most, and who often have the most challenges in terms of access. And I'm thinking about things like transport and the affordability of going to your doctor. And so that's why we need to pass legislation like this and do many other things to free up our health workforce to be able to provide the level of care that New Zealanders demand. And it is an absolute tragedy that this is the thing the National Party chose to play politics over. That this is the kind of legislation that sits on the back burner for 5 long years and then finally gets passed as part of an urgency motion early in the morning on a Thursday morning. I think that speaks volumes about where this government's priorities lie. I think it speaks volumes about this government's priorities, and I know that had Dr. Paul Hutchison been the Minister of Health with this national government, that this would have been a priority. He would have progressed this much sooner than now, and there's a gentleman who will be missed from this parliament because he brought some sanity to the health policy of the National Party.
Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Mr. Chairman, it gives me great pleasure, in fact, to deal